Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Do I need to talk louder?
And yes, free.
Is it on? There we go. All right. Thank you, everyone. My name is Mike Bradley. I serve as the Dean of the Graduate College at Arkansas Tech University. And last year we had Dr. Lowell Kennedy up here for a good conversation. And then recently Joe asked me if we'd be interested in doing it again. And we were talking about some different folks maybe we could bring to the conference. And one of the first names that popped in my head is our guest today. He is Mr. John Gifford. And I have, the way I found Mr. Gifford is a book that was recommended to me. It's Red Dirt Country. And he has a variety of other books too, but we're going to be talking about this one primarily. And I was telling Dr. Fink, I don't know where Dr. Fink is. Oh, he's right over there. I was telling Dr. Fink earlier, like if you have ever read Aldo Leopold's Sand County Almanac, this is a very similar type a read if you've ever done that. But anyhow, we're going to have a conversation, and afterwards we'll have some time for Q&A. And Mr. Gifford has graciously allowed some extra time. He'll be at can't see it that well. There's a table right over to my left. If you're interested in talking to him about one of his books or maybe purchasing a book or whatnot. But let's go ahead and bring Mr. Gifford on stage.
Yeah, you can. I'll be. Yeah, that's you. Hey, thank you.
And we're going to sit because I'm an old man.
What does that make me?
Experienced. We'll say experienced. And I do have my notes here, so I stay on track because if you know me, I can get off track pretty quickly. So I guess, so John Gifford is an author from Edmond, Oklahoma, and has a variety of books with the theme Oklahoma, place connected to Oklahoma, red dirt, and all that. So I guess first things first, we're going to explore his time as a writer, his background, where he came from, what's influenced him, and then we'll dive into some things related to the book, and then maybe leave some time at the very end to talk about some of his projects he has going on right now. So John, I think first things first is, I guess, introduce yourself to the crowd and talk to us a little bit about where you're from, where you grew up, and all that.
John Gifford. I'm a nature writer from Edmond, Oklahoma. I grew up in Norman, Oklahoma. Went to public schools there, product of the University of Oklahoma. Both of my parents worked there. And I joined the Marines after high school and moved away for a few years, but I came back, and I've been in this area most of my life, and I've been very connected to the landscape. My father had me out fishing with him from the day I turned 2 years old. And so that was my introduction into the outdoors. And I've been attuned to nature ever since then. These days I write about nature in general, environmental concerns, wildlife, things like that. I'm very focused on what's happening with our planet right now, like many of you. And so I daily find things an inspiration just from going out on a walk with my dog or something. There's always something out there that's fascinating to me with the natural world. So I tend to focus most of my work on that these days.
And I don't know, some of us have been implants to Oklahoma. Some of us were raised here and whatnot. And I think about when the book was recommended to me, I thought about there's a Vince Gill song, Oklahoma Dust. I don't know if any of y'all know this song. If you don't, you can go YouTube it or whatnot. But so when I saw Red Dirt, I thought about how Red Dirt is a part of who I am and a part of who you are if you're from Oklahoma, right? So awesome title is what I was going to say.
Thank you.
So tell us a little bit. I guess what I'm interested in next is tell us how you got interested in writing. Where was that spark from?
I suppose it started growing up. My parents always had magazines and books around the house, and I loved magazines particularly. I would always rather be out riding my bike or playing sports with my friends, but if I couldn't be doing that, then at home reading a magazine or a book was, up there, things I enjoyed doing. And I think it just it kind of grew from that. I've always had a love of reading. In college, I enjoyed immensely my writing classes. I studied sciences, I studied history, but I kind of gravitated to writing at probably my junior year. And so from that point on, I really focused on literature and creative writing. And I had a couple of internships at my last year of college with the wildlife department and the Oklahoma Today magazine, a part of the travel and recreation department. So I had some experience with magazine production with that, and that started me in my career of magazine writing, and the books just grew from that. So outside of that, I wrote letters during the war. Served in the Persian Gulf War with the Marine Corps, and we were still writing letters back then. I don't know that they do that anymore. I think they just send emails today. But I still have the letters that I received from my parents and friends. And I was working on an essay a few years ago about the history of letter writing, and so I had to go into the attic and dig out some of those old letters. And I was glad that I still had them. I could read through and remember what was going on at that time. So it was a neat experience.
So in thinking about some of that and some of your work with this book, especially, and some of your experiences growing up and then your time in the service and whatnot. So where did you start to find, because and I talked about a little bit about I don't know, I would think it's a compliment. I hope you do, like the sense of the Aldo Leopold type storytelling that happens in this book, especially. Where did you kind of where did you start forming your voice and forming your style? How did that come about?
I think most writers would answer that by saying it's everything that they've done in life, everything that they've read, and all of their experience writing. It just all accumulates and to give you the voice that you have at any point in time, which I think is probably for most of us is always evolving. For me, I think it's a reflection of a lot of the books that I've read. I'm a big admirer of Aldo Leopold, like so many others, and I'm also an admirer of the great English nature writers, particularly Gilbert White, the Reverend Gilbert White. He was the inspiration for my book, Red Dirt Country. He's the one that introduced us to the field of ecology. He reminded us that humans are part of the natural world. And what he did was he studied very narrowly and closely the natural world around his home and his village in southern England. And with the sort of the attitude that what was apparently and on first glance a limitation became his opportunity to study these things, the wildlife, the weather, so closely. And he gave us a book called The Natural History of Selborne. It was published in, I think, 1782 or 84. It was the first book of literary nature writing. It was outside of the Bible, outside of the works of Shakespeare and the works of John Bunyan. It's the fourth most, at last count, the fourth most widely published book in the English language. It's probably the most famous natural history book in the world. We don't read it a lot over here, but it's a classic everywhere else around the world. In fact, during the Second World War, when the Allies were battling the Axis powers, Japanese scholars were at work translating Gilbert White's book. It's that influential. And so that's what inspired me, because of his willingness to see his backyard, his home, his village as a sort of an environmental laboratory to study and to write about.
Exactly. So thank you for the great segue, by the way. So I think the other thing I was thinking about is, what are some other writers, some of these other books that kind of helped you along your way? What inspired you? What did you read along your journey as a writer and as a professional in this way? And then what are you reading now?
I used to, for a time, particularly during graduate school, I was writing short fiction. I wrote short stories because I was influenced by writers like Ernest Hemingway and particularly Raymond Carver. His short stories were so appealing to me because the people he wrote about in the late mid-century years of the 20th century were people that I knew and livelihoods that I knew about growing up. And so reading that reminds me very much of childhood. But from an artistic perspective, I think we all admire what he did with these very, very short stories. He wrote short stories because he had, like all of us, family obligations, and he wanted to be able to crank out a work from one sitting, a couple of hours, whatever it may be. And he wrote these very short stories. Then he had some success publishing, but it wasn't until he met the editor, Gordon Lish, and Lish began to cut, and he made these short stories even shorter and I think more powerful and more beautiful. And so he's known as a brilliant writer of short stories, and his stories being so short really appealed to me, that he could have such power and effect in these literary works that were 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 words in a lot of cases. They're very short. And he was probably, his stories were the classics of the second half of the 20th century. And I consider Ernest Hemingway's stories the classics of the first half of the 20th century. Both of those were very influential on me. Right now, I'm reading a lot of English nature writing, and particularly by an author named Richard Mabey. He's seen as, in terms contemporary times, he's been called England's greatest nature writer. He is quite prolific. Um, his his publishing career, spans most of my lifetime, and so I'm reading a lot of the books that he published in the 70s and 80s about all sorts of nature, flowers, foraging, just nature in general, bird watching. And so I think as a writer, everything you read has some effect and influence on what you're writing, how you write, and how you see the world. Gilbert White really, I was always raised to respect the natural world, but Gilbert White really taught me how to view and be present in nature.
I was informed or asked to take a short intermission, which is actually a good break, because right after the intermission, we're gonna come back and talk a little bit more about the book. When he came up and said we're gonna take an intermission, I was like, what the heck is going on? And then I saw some folks in the background. I'm like, oh, did I park in the wrong spot? And then our video, Ray Nail here. So a quick shout out. This is Ray Nail. He's with Dronicle. He's a videographer and drone photographer. He's been gracious enough to film this for us. Would you please just stand up and wave? Yeah, dude. Yeah. So if you were here last year with Dr. Lowell Canady, Ray and Dronicle, they did the video for us last year, and it's on YouTube. And we're going to do the same thing with Mr. Gifford's interview. So we'll have a YouTube link that's available later. But I did want to give a shout out to Ray, because he's been gracious enough to be here. He had to take a day off of work to be here. So I told him I'll buy him a drink later or something. I don't know. So anyway, thank you. So we'll dive back in, and I appreciate everybody's flexibility, just like Mitchell said. It's actually a good break, because I think next I kind of want to shift to more talking about the book, Red Dirt Country. I think to kind of lead us into that, John, could you tell us a little bit about growing up in Oklahoma, and how the places and the people and your experiences in Oklahoma kind of informed kind of like where you started with the book and the foundation of the book?
I think Oklahoma, with its variety of landscapes and sometimes volatile, but usually very pleasant weather. I don't know, big blue skies. There's just so much to be inspired by with our lands. And I've always been attuned to nature and spending time outdoors on my various adventures, fly fishing or hiking or bicycling or whatever. It always gave me something to write about that was generally set within a certain landscape, and the landscape was vivid enough it became a lot of times almost like a character. So these just kind of parlayed into the kind of nature essays I write today. And as a nature writer, I'm attuned to what other people in this field are writing, and you just have so many various influences guiding you to produce whatever it is you're working on. And like I said, I happened to read Gilbert White's book, The Natural History of Selborne, and something in me clicked, and I realized that I could do something like that for Oklahoma, for my community in central Oklahoma, and talk about the wildlife, talk about our weather, talk about sometimes folklore, things like that, that I wanted to explore a little bit in these nature essays. So that's kind of how I got started.
Thank you. So I guess the next question I would have is, somebody said, what is Red Dirt Country about? How would you respond to what the book is about?
It's been described, and I tend to describe it in this one sentence. It's a literary meditation on the Oklahoma landscape and the rich biodiversity of the Southern Great Plains.
Excuse me. One of the pieces in the book that I kind of connected to a lot, I would say, is you talked about wildfire. And I remember it was probably 2011, 2010, on the turnpike between Stillwater and Tulsa. And, some of you may have had a similar experience, right? You see the smoke, and all of a sudden you see the cop cars and they're stopping things. But it's something that I'm not, living in a couple different spots, people don't have that same experience as elsewhere. So as you thought about, when you're writing the book and then you're thinking about your experiences in Oklahoma, what are some of the unique things about Oklahoma that you wanted to share, whether it's the wildfire or, I call it the unique tornado culture in
Mhm.
Oklahoma, right? You don't have that as much. So what are some of those things that kind of you wanted to make sure you shared with others?
I think our abundance of wildlife being one. I'm a bird watcher, so I'm particularly drawn to a species called the Mississippi kite. Where we live in central Oklahoma is probably an epicenter for kites in Oklahoma, and we know from the Baumgartner's 1992, I think, book Oklahoma Bird Life that our state has the highest concentration of nesting Mississippi kites in the country, and so having so many of these birds around me, they come each year then for summer and they nest in my neighborhood. I had a great opportunity to observe them. And that's something I do every year. And so when I was writing this essay, Birds of Summer, I wanted to really showcase this beautiful and elegant bird. Next to the scissor-tail flycatcher, I don't know of a more elegant and beautiful bird. This is an aerobatic bird like almost like none other. And the things that you can see it do when it dives on a cicada or a grasshopper. It's just amazing. This year, in fact, I was out in my front yard and I had a long earthworm inching across my driveway. So I picked it up. I flipped it into my yard where I thought it might burrow down and do some good in my soil. But I no sooner had done that than a kite had come from across the street and swooped across my toes, and he grabbed that and was gone. And they're just amazing birds, and they never cease to fascinate me. So I had to showcase this bird in this book. And the other thing being wildfires. This is such an interesting thing because our land here evolved in the presence of wildfires, but yet since probably the late 1800s, we've worked so diligently to suppress these things, and our landscape has changed because of that, and it continues to change. And so I see a lot of things today, the eastern red cedar encroachment across our grasslands, for example, result of wildfire suppression. And interestingly, when I mentioned a moment ago, I had started interning with a couple of magazines while I was in college. One of these was the Department of Wildlife Conservation in Oklahoma City. And one of my first assignments was to research prescribed fire and its impacts, and that kind of got me thinking about fire, and I learned how beneficial it was and how vital vital it was to our landscape. So this essay actually stemmed from that early experience. I wrote about it again in college, but it wasn't until years later that I had the literary chops to really get into this and try to make some art out of it. And so that's what I did. And the end result is Fires, is the essay in this book about wildfire. So those two things really come to mind.
So and maybe this is kind of in a similar vein. Is there some piece in the book or one of the essays that was a little bit more personal, or maybe, and I don't mean this in a difficult, I want to say, was there a piece that was a little bit more difficult to write or convey, but not necessarily in a negative way, but something maybe it's more personal, more difficult to get across, or something you want to make besides the fire, certainly, but what other piece of the book is super personal?
It's really not that kind of book. It's nature writing. I tried to write it with a literary flair. So I want someone who enjoys language and enjoys the literary arts to be able to read this and get something out of it. These aren't necessarily informational essays as much as inspirational. I want you to read these and be inspired by our biodiversity here in Oklahoma. And so I would say, it wasn't that kind of book. It's not a memoir. It's not an expose or anything. So even though I'm present in a lot of these essays, the essays aren't about me, except in one case when I was bird watching at the Oklahoma City airport while waiting for my wife's flight to arrive. And the epiphany I had from that experience was how great an experience that can be, to go to your local airport and just see what kind of birds, other than the big ones that whoosh passengers up into the air. There's a lot of bird life at our airports.
And if I remember, that's the one where like you thought she was arriving and she wasn't, and had to go back and forth and whatnot. One of the things. So I was sharing that I was reading this book with one of my friends there in Arkansas, and I was talking about and I don't know how. I think sometimes we lose the specialness of our place, right? And I was talking about tornado culture, right? And I know you talk about that a little bit in the book too. And I know. Don't raise your hand, right? But like you hear the tornado sirens and you go outside to see what it looks like, right? Mm-hmm. Or you look at the cloud or whatnot. But I was talking to a friend about that, and he was like, "What in the world are you talking about?" but when I read the book, and I felt that connection to that. I was like, I grew up with that sense of, when it gets real close, you go try to find cover, but then, otherwise you're kind of checking it out. And the same thing with like I've never, in different places I've lived, I've never seen the same kind of thunderstorms roll across, right? Um, I guess before we kind of move on to the next section, if you were to write the next version of this book, is there anything else you would include, or is there anything that you would want to add on to? Because I guess I'm asking this because I was thinking about, how do I talk about that tornado culture to somebody that doesn't live in Oklahoma, right? And I thought you did a good job with that. But what else? Is there anything else?
I, that maybe leads into a question you might want to ask later on about my next project. But my next project is a manuscript I've just completed. That it's not part two of this book, but it takes a look at central and western Oklahoma, more of the southern plains, into the Texas Panhandle, into eastern New Mexico, and the essays are all shorter essays, but there's 7 or 8 essays for each month, and it's a look at nature through the calendar year in this part of the country. So we start in winter, tracking a coyote through the snow, to spring, and the spring thunderstorms and the first rains, and what a pleasant experience that can be, sitting out on your porch in the evening when the first spring rains come through, to watching the kites in the summer, and to the autumn migration. So just the nuances of the natural world throughout the calendar year. That's kind of what I did with my last manuscript.
So it was a good segue. So, but as you were just sharing that, I was thinking too, like, you know, and I've hiked a variety of trails across the state, and I think about what Oklahoma has given me, what has taught me. Because I don't know, like, if you ever meet somebody from Texas and they've got that strong Texas pride, right? And I think that sometimes in Oklahoma we don't have that same strength of pride. And I don't know what's missing there, but I think about all Oklahoma has given me as a person, all the things it's taught me. I think my question for you would be like, whether it's writing the book or growing up here, what are some things that you feel like Oklahoma has given or taught you?
What comes to mind is the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral William Crow, used to say, if you come to America, you haven't seen America until you've seen Oklahoma. And he was from Oklahoma City, so he was, of course, partial. But N.G. Debo wrote in 1949, the great Oklahoma author, that the forces that went into making our country kind of reached a head here in Oklahoma, and they accelerated, they intensified, they amplified. So the person that can really understand Oklahoma and how we came to be can better understand how our country came to be. And so Oklahoma, in that sense, is very much a microcosm for our country, in a way that few other states are.
And I think so. As I'm thinking like different questions, right? So when you write about Oklahoma or you write about a landscape, what kind of responsibilities do you feel are it kind of come with that territory of writing about a place, writing about the environment, and communicating these stories? Do you feel like a sense of responsibility to make sure that there's a certain story told, or a certain approach to your writing?
Not necessarily a certain story told. I think we all have a responsibility to the lands that sustain us, and that are responsible for our livelihoods in many ways. Beyond that, and looking specifically at writing, I think it's helpful to find a landscape that resonates with you, that appeals to you on a personal level, and then become an advocate and a student of that landscape and share it with others. And for me, that particular landscape is the grassland environment. I'm from central Oklahoma, and certainly out in western Oklahoma, you have these vast grasslands, open landscapes where you can really appreciate the sky, the horizon, and on first glance they seem empty, but they're so full of life, and they're so special in so many ways. And so a lot of my work revolves around writing about grasslands and what makes them special. And so what I hope to achieve with that is to inspire people to look closer at these landscapes, understand why they're special. They're disappearing right now. We're losing our grasslands and the birds that live in these areas because of a variety of reasons, development and row crop agricultural conversion, things like that. And so I think there's a tendency in this country to think of grasslands as somehow deficient because they're not covered with trees, but that's far from the case. And so these are very important ecosystems that we have to defend, or they're going to be gone.
It kind of, as you're sharing that, I was thinking the song, like Oklahoma, where, we know we belong to the land, not necessarily the land belongs to us, right? And carries a sense of responsibility with making sure that we take care of these resources. Um, so I want to kind of steer us in a direction to start talking about your next project here in a second. But I think the kind of segue there is when you, whether it's through this work or through your past works, as you think about somebody who may be thinking about writing, whether it's professional or a hobby or an online blog or whatever, maybe they're sharing a Facebook post. Um, what kind of advice or what kind of thoughts do you have about having somebody find their voice or find their style?
I think it's helpful to study, depending on what you want to do, journalism or creative writing, literature, whatever that may be. But I think it's helpful also to go out and have experiences in life that have nothing to do with writing. Go and have experiences so that you can have something to bring back to your writing. And that would be my strongest recommendation to anyone that wants to get into any of the creative arts, is to go out and live life and have something to bring to your art, because it'll be better for it.
So I thought of another question before we move on, actually. So, hey, it's um, somebody was asking me the other day what I was reading, and so I'm reading a book called The Last American Road Trip, which is really good. I'm gonna pronounce her name wrong. It's like Sarah Kinzor, I believe. And then recently I reread Walden, Henry David Thoreau, which I don't know if you've read that. It's a difficult read. It's not very long, but it's tough to read as far as the language and whatnot. But so I was going to ask, what are you reading?
A book called Living in Exmoor. It's by an author named Hope Bourne. She she lived most of her life in this remote west side of England, this hill country, and she was unusual in that she lived alone in a small house on a property where she didn't have running water. She had to hunt, and she had in many ways a rough existence, but she loved it, and that's what she wanted to do. And so she knew probably better than anyone what it was like to live there and what the land was all about, the weather, things like that. And she talks about being out working on the farm and seeing a pack of foxhounds go by chasing a fox or whatever, and some of the old architecture and country ways. And that's one of the things that attracts me really to English nature writing, is because I think that England's national identity is tied up so strongly with the countryside, and that's the places. Those are the places that really appeal to me, and so there's such a strong identity associated with these rural areas and rural lifestyles that are really often overlooked here in the United States. So anyway, to answer your question, it's that book, and it was published, I think, in probably the '60s. She published 4 books, but that's her best known work.
Sure. So I want to ask what you're doing next. So you talked about a couple different projects in the works. So could you talk us through about, I think you have a book coming out fairly soon. Talk to us about that.
Yeah. Early next year, I'll have a book out called Landscaping for Wildlife. Again, it's more nature essays. This book is unique in that I've divided it into 2 parts. The first being nature essays, the second being a look at my personal form of advocacy. I advocate for nature and the environment, and I'm not a scientist, and so I can't do it in some of the ways that a scientist might, but I do a lot of letter writing and campaigning. I've taught master classes on creative writing, but I've used I found a way to incorporate nature into these things like that. So I give various examples because I feel like it's incumbent on all of us to figure out how we can be advocates for landscapes that are meaningful to us, and speak up for the voiceless, because we have to do that.
And I think so when you think about that and your connection to a place, so I think about a sense of place attachment. I know there's a variety of other kind of terms and philosophies there. What I'm trying to think about how I want to frame this, right? You think about why Oklahoma is special. And I think that sometimes when people, so I tell people from I'm Oklahoma, and you may also get this, and people smile, they snicker, or they say something that's in the media that's recent, right? And I get defensive, and I'm like, you know what? Oklahoma's a pretty neat place. And, I kind of do the same spill, like, it's very diverse, and I know everybody says this, but it got good folks. And I was sharing earlier that with you that, the people in this room are part of why I love what I do and where I'm from. So what if I guess if you were to make a commercial about Oklahoma, or you had your 30-second sales pitch or elevator pitch, tell us why you love where you live and what do you love about Oklahoma?
I think our people are the best in the nation. I think we have the best people in the nation. When you come here and you speak to an Oklahoman, you know it. They're authentic and they're sincere, and they're kind from a deep and profound, deep and profound way. I think I was on a plane coming back to Oklahoma City from somewhere one time. This was several years ago. And as we were taxiing to the gate, I heard someone behind me mention to a friend across the aisle that this is the place where we have such bad weather. And it's interesting to me that we're known for such bad weather because our weather can be consequential, particularly in late spring and early summer. But I turned and I said, well, that's very interesting you say that, because most of our weather, 85%, 87% of our weather throughout the year is exactly like it is right now. And it was beautiful and sunny and calm. And there's no better weather than that, in my opinion. And we have primarily that weather here in Oklahoma. And I think that's interesting and remarkable. My family runs a theater company. My son is an actor. He comes back from New York several times a year, and we produce shows in Oklahoma City. We just had a show last month. It was our first of the 2025 and 26 season. So for a lot of these shows, we hire people to come in and act, and some of them come from the East Coast or other areas around the country, and almost all of them remark when they get here how big our sky is and how blue our sky is. And I think that's something to be proud of. We really have this wonderful, vast horizon and these big sunny skies. We have such an abundance of sunshine here. And I think that's something that I don't take for granted, because I have lived in other places where they don't have the weather we have or the sunshine that we have. And that's wonderful. I think that's wonderful about Oklahoma.
So before we get to wrap this up, I just want to remind everybody that Mr. Gifford will be here after this is done. Happy to chat, answer questions, share stories, or if you're interested in getting a book and whatnot. So I want to ask one more question, and then if you have any questions, we'll have the audience. Where's Mitchell at? Mitchell's back there. He said he would ask the first question. So if you can beat him to it, you get a prize. I don't know what that prize would be. So John, I think to wrap it up is the thinking about your entire career, and you share. So you hit on a lot of things, right? You're like, Oklahoma has a lot of unique things. Oklahoma has a lot to be proud of, and I think sometimes we don't share that story and share those voices enough. And I think that what I liked about Red Dirt Country was that it really captured a lot of what Oklahoma meant to me. In a way that I could say, this is what it is, we're known for bad weather, but here's a good spin on it. Or, we've got these wildfires, but here's the story behind it. And I think we don't do a good enough job with that. And I thank you for writing the book and sharing more of that. What advice would you give somebody that's kind of doing some similar work as far and thinking more about like your conservation, environmental activism type role? How can we contribute to that? What can we do?
I think you can study the ground you stand on, and be a student of your backyard, of your neighborhood, of your community, and whatever about it speaks to you. Learn all you can about it, and then share why it inspires you, and be an advocate and an ambassador for it, because you might inspire someone else. You just never know who you'll inspire just by being who you are and pursuing the work that you're supposed to pursue.
Mr. Gifford, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mr. John Gifford, everyone.
Thank you.
Would anybody like to beat Mitchell to the first question? All right, Mitchell, you're on. Nobody said anything.
All right. So is there a hardcore green space that really stands out to you in Oklahoma? If you don't want to pick favorites, like the Guinness, we all are sure inclineful. You pick something outside of it. Then is there one that particularly in your experience growing up here really stood out?
There's several. Mitch Park in Edmond, about 2.5 miles from my house, is special because I walk there frequently, and it was just over 2 years ago on, I think it was November 1st of 2023, I was walking in the afternoon, and a couple of pair of gray foxes came out of the trees, out of a creek, and they crossed the trail in front of me and went into another bank of trees and brush. And that inspired me to write my most recent manuscript, which I've just finished, which I'm calling a grassland journal. It's not it's out with publishers right now, so it's not out in book form yet, but that park is special to me for that reason. I really love the Salt Plains National Wildlife Refuge. The landscapes there are phenomenal, particularly the Salt Flats. I'm a photographer also, and I get a lot of inspiration going out there and seeing these what look like austere environments, but there's always something. If you look closer, there's always a ray of light on a piece of driftwood or something like that to really spark your imagination and to get out there and want to go back the next time. The bird watching out there is spectacular. It's if you go out there, particularly in the spring or the fall, it'll blow your mind the number of shorebirds that we have here in the Southern Great Plains. It's just amazing, but it's a beautiful facility, and I would encourage you, if you haven't been there, go visit this place.
So I'm going to ask. So I asked, where's Nash at? There. We were talking about this earlier. So I always ask people, what's your next adventure that you have planned or what you want to do?
I'm working on getting a nonprofit off the ground. This is very early stages. It's not unveiled completely yet, but I'm working on a project that's going to benefit people and wildlife in Oklahoma City.
So tell us a little bit more.
Through advocacy, through outreach, and through an emphasis on facilitating public art that really brings awareness to nature and fosters a vivid sense of place in this case, Oklahoma City. I'm going to work to promote that, and because I feel like wildlife needs a voice, particularly urban wildlife. It's easy to overlook the needs of our wild neighbors when we're out zipping down the highway, but then you see a beautiful fox run over, for example, like I did yesterday, and you're like, we're not addressing this in the way that it needs to be addressed. And so I'm going to attempt to bring some recognition to these causes and generate support for them and for wildlife.
Any other questions, folks? Way in the back. So you got to talk real loud.
Yeah, I think so.
So, John, I fully believe is what you have to say, and I think that's awesome. And I'm an outfield for Tulsa County Park, so I agree. I hear about this Talladega voice. Like, I love what you're saying. But
Thank you.
Steve, I do find myself wherever you talk to people that get it, or it's for the license thing already agreement and the world, I mean, especially in Oklahoma, we have to push that needle in the different direction, including in that direction where people are getting on board with us. What do you say to people that don't believe what you're saying? Wow, how do you get them on that same page? What do you say?
Well, through me, through my background in literature, I'm trying to bring a literary sensibility to nature writing to engage maybe a different audience. And I just tell people in my network, I talk about it. Not long ago, I was asked to write an award nomination letter for a friend and former professor at the University of Oklahoma. And so I didn't consciously set out to write about nature, but she's partly responsible for my career as a nature writer. And so I talked about that. I talked about the things that she did to bring, to make that feel like it was worthwhile for me to pursue that. And the qualities that she brought to the classroom that inspired me as a writer, as a developing writer then. And part of that was just the confidence she helped instill in me. I would write about wildlife and she would make me feel like this is important. You should keep doing this. And she made me believe that I could do it. So I pointed that out, and she actually ended up winning the award. She retired last year. And so I was grateful to have taken several classes with her and maintain my friendship with her throughout her tenure at OU. Thank you for that question. It was very good.
Yes, ma'am.
If you're nonprofit, you said it's connected to art. So is it sculpture? Are you connecting with natural artists that are nature based?
That's a good question. It's not fully baked, but the idea is to promote artists who find inspiration in the natural world, to bring credit and attention to their work, and also to wildlife and our landscapes and the need to really invest ourselves in protecting these things. And so I plan to seek out nature poets, sculptors, painters, photographers, anyone I can get. We're planning a a panel discussion next year. I haven't, the details aren't set in stone just yet, but we're going to showcase 3 or 4 of them in Oklahoma City next year. And I hope to have a variety of mediums represented through this. So good question.
Feel like we bombarded you with something you weren't planning on.
And it's fine.
Anybody, any other questions before we?
Come on, Watts.
No bad questions.
You say that until you're a professor or a teacher. Okay, well, so let's give him one more round of applause, Mr. John Gifford. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Again, he'll be over to the table to my left, your right. Enjoy the rest of your conference. Thank you.